What if the world we know is built on the ashes of a civilization no one told us about? Imagine maps that once showed an empire spanning continents, then suddenly erased. Imagine buildings so vast and intricate they seem impossible for their supposed time. You were told they were just city halls or temporary exhibits. Beneath our streets, windows vanish into the earth, staircases descend into silence, and archives carry gaps too clean to be accidents. They call it Tartaria, a name whispered in forgotten atlases, a shadow empire some believe held knowledge of energy, architecture, and power far beyond our own. If true, its destruction wasn't natural, it was deliberate, a cover-up written in stone and silence. Tonight, we are not just exploring history, we are breaking into its locked rooms. Ask yourself, did humanity inherit a world already built? And if so, who buried the truth? In the fading ink of ancient atlases, one word repeats with stubborn stubbornness: Tartary. From the edges of Europe to the vastness of Siberia, mapmakers once marked an indistinct territory with that name, a place of tundra, steppe, and mystery. Travelers' accounts were sparse. Merchants whispered of strange cities, and cartographers filled blank spaces with labels they did not entirely understand. Yet some maps present Tartary not as a vague expanse, but as a bounded dominion, detailed, extensive, and oddly authoritative. In the 19th century, as explorers and surveyors advanced, the label receded, and by the dawn of the 20th century, it vanished from many modern maps. For those who study the traces, this disappearance is not mundane. Where once a name signaled presence, a sudden silence took its place. Why would a designation so widely used evaporate from official records? Scholars argue that Tartary was a catch-all term for lands Europeans knew little about, an umbrella for nomadic regions without centralized states. But the question haunting investigators is deeper. If Tartary were merely a cartographic convenience, why did artists and architects across continents build in a style that seems to echo a single aesthetic language? And why do photographers from old city archives point to similarities that cross oceans? Perhaps the maps are not only evidence of geography, but of a memory with edges, and the loss of that name signals the first erasure in a longer history. If so, what else was quietly removed from our past? Wander through old city centers, and you will see the bones of something grander, an architecture that seems to speak of a hand beyond ordinary times. Colossal domes, ornate cornices, sweeping staircases, and patterned facades appear across continents with uncanny similarity. From the palaces of Eastern Europe to civic buildings in American cities, a vocabulary of design repeats itself. Massive proportions, symmetry on a civic scale, and decorative motifs that belong more to an imperial imagination than to modest municipal budgets. Advocates of the Tartarian thesis argue these are not merely stylistic coincidences. They suggest a shared heritage, perhaps the surviving skeletons of an older urban fabric. Why do certain buildings seem to emerge fully formed, sometimes in decades rather than centuries? Why do photographs from the late 1800s show structures that look far older than their documented construction dates? Official records credit architects and engineers, but some pages are missing, plans are vague, and timelines feel compressed. Where gaps appear, speculation rushes in to fill them. For believers, the replication of architectural motifs across distant cities implies an exchange of knowledge, a global repository of builders, or remnants of an erased tradition. Critics dismiss these connections as aesthetic diffusion, styles adopted, adapted, and taught through academies and trade. Yet the persistence of certain design choices, repeated at scale, continues to stir wonder. Were these buildings newly born in their eras, or reclaimed monuments of a forgotten urban civilization? Each carved stone and engraved pediment asks us questions. Across old city photographs, many buildings show first-floor windows half-buried, doorways that lead to cellar-like spaces, and staircases descending into a forgotten level. This phenomenon fuels the legend of the mud flood, a sudden deluge of earth that buried entire neighborhoods overnight. Eyewitness journals, antique photos, and local lore are assembled into a pattern. Streets raised, basements revealed, and entire facades partially concealed by new ground levels. Some argue this is evidence of a global catastrophe that reshaped urban topography. If true, the implications are vast. Cities would have been rebuilt above ruined cores, and later generations would inherit only fragments of the original urban plan. Skeptics explain these features as ordinary consequences of urban development. Landscaping, debris accumulation, and the practical raising of street levels for sanitation and drainage over decades. But proponents note the recurrence of similar buried features across different continents, claiming the probability of coincidence is low. Photographs sometimes show workers excavating layers of earth to reveal older facades, as if peeling back time. Whether a result of cataclysm or accumulation, the visual of half-buried rooms presses on the imagination. It demands a question: if cities were layered in this way, what lay under the streets? Are these subsurface spaces simply cellars and foundations, or remnants of a civilization whose visible face was purposefully obscured? Accounts mention massive cleanups, steam shovels, and the sudden disappearance of entire districts after exhibitions or wars. Could organized demolition and deliberate burying explain the uniformity we observe across archives and memory? Photographs, engravings, and eyewitness descriptions from the late 19th century sometimes include devices and constructions that resist easy explanation. Towering masts resembling antennas, latticed frameworks, and ornate metallic structures appear in images of cityscapes and expositions. Some see in these artifacts the traces of lost engineering, mechanisms designed to channel energy, resonate, or transmit power without fuel. Contemporary witnesses described experiments with electricity and strange apparatuses whose functions were not fully understood by the public. The World's Fairs revealed gleaming exhibitions of technology, yet also displayed structures that vanished after the events, as if dismantled and removed from the shared landscape. Those who believe in Tartaria argue these vanished constructs are evidence of applied knowledge far beyond the mainstream record, perhaps a harnessing of atmospheric or geomagnetic forces. If such systems existed, they could explain rapid industrial feats and the ability to erect monumental architecture quickly. Opponents counter that the era's fascination with electricity, wireless telegraphy, and experimental architecture produced ephemeral structures that were indeed built for show, then taken down. Still, the visual similarity between ephemeral fair constructions and alleged Tartarian towers raises doubt. Did the 19th century briefly reveal technologies that were later suppressed? Or did exhibitionary spectacle merely borrow from an aesthetic of possibility, confusing ambition with an actual legacy? Those structures stand in photographs like riddles, their outlines half remembered, asking who benefited from their disappearance altogether. History is a ledger written, edited, and sometimes burnt. The narrative of Tartaria hinges not only on physical ruins, but on gaps in the written record, where the chronicles, the official decrees, or the continuous genealogies that most empires leave behind. Advocates argue that documents were destroyed or reattributed after a collapse, that archivists and officials repackage surviving infrastructures as the achievements of new regimes. There are instances of libraries razed, collections dispersed, and records lost to fire or war. Yet the scale of suppression suggested by Tartaria theorists would require coordination across governments, scholars, and media. Who would orchestrate such an elaborate rewrite, and why? Power, some say, is an answer. Knowledge of technologies or social structures that threaten reigning institutions would be inconvenient at best and dangerous at worst. The erasure theory suggests that the act of naming or failing to name is itself a tool of control. To remove a civilization from maps and school books is to make it disappear for future generations. Photographs and orphaned blueprints become the last witnesses. They seem to say that a decision was made, whether by accident or design, to recast legacy into a palatable story. If history can be curated, perhaps it can be falsified. The possibility that archives hide more than they reveal turns research into detective work, and every absence becomes a clue demanding further excavation. Archivists talk about gaps caused by negligence, but concerted silence across regions suggests intention or coincidental catastrophe. Scattered across landscapes, star forts and geometric earthworks arrest the eye with their deliberate shapes. Angular bastions form stars and complex polygons, their earthworks carving geometry into the land. To the casual observer, they are old military works, products of early modern conflicts when artillery demanded new forms of defense. But to those who study them as fragments of Tartaria, the consistency of their designs across continents suggests a broader purpose. Some researchers argue that the geometry aligns with astronomical points, nodal lines, or ley-like connections between sites. Were these formations functional, channels for energy, or markers of a lost surveying science, or symbolic expressions of a shared cosmology? Photographs and surveys reveal precise angles and proportional systems that hint at advanced mathematics and large-scale coordination. Such expertise could underpin monumental urban planning and the construction of vast civic structures. If star forts are nodes in an ordered landscape, then the land itself becomes a map of priorities now forgotten. Skeptics counter that similar military designs spread because they worked, reflecting practical diffusion rather than mystical intent. Yet the aura around these earthworks refuses to dissipate. Their geometry draws lines in the imagination, connecting ruins to ruins, cities to star-shaped parks, as if pointing to a blueprint hidden beneath modern maps. Whether bastions once protected a state or marked energies we no longer perceive, they remain enduring, enigmatic markers of hands that shape geometry into the world. They compel us to retrace pathways erased by time and policy. Across skylines, domes rise like crowns upon civic centers, their curvature catching light and attention. From Byzantine onion domes to neoclassical capitals, these rounded forms speak a shared language of authority and ritual. But enthusiasts of Tartaria see more than symbolism. They see potential function. Could domes, spires, and ornate towers have served as resonators, concentrators, or receivers in systems now lost? Old photographs reveal pinnacles and finials that resemble antennae. Ornate metalwork and lattice towers appear beside grand halls in images long archived. In some city scenes, spires pierce the sky with unusual repeat patterns, implying a design intention beyond mere ornament. Theorists posit that these elements formed part of a distributed infrastructure, an invisible lattice of energy nodes, integrating civic architecture into a larger operational network. Those arguing for technological purpose point to contemporaneous experiments with wireless transmission and early electrical devices, suggesting a historical window when public imagination and technical innovation overlapped in strange ways. Critics counter that these details are decorative flourishes of 19th century eclecticism, a time when architects mixed revivals and inventions for aesthetic effect. Still, the recurrence of certain structural motifs invites curiosity. If towers and domes once played roles in a system of power, then their later repurposing as symbols of statehood represents a transformation of function into mythology. Their silhouettes persist as echoes of capacities we no longer understand. The great exhibitions of the 19th and early 20th centuries stunned the public with palaces of glass, iron, and ornament. In cities from Paris to Chicago, vast complexes rose for a season, dazzling visitors with displays of progress and global reach. Official narratives describe these pavilions as temporary, built for spectacle and then dismantled. Yet photographs and maps often show entire plazas that vanish from later plans, replaced by new buildings, parks, or empty lots. Those who connect the fairs to Tartaria argue that the exhibitions exposed a latent urban fabric. Massive structures, perhaps relics of a prior civilization, open to the world for a brief encounter then erased. Why would societies construct such monumental complexes only to remove them wholesale? Some claim the fairs provided an opportunity to display reclaimed heritage, demonstrating advanced engineering as curiosities before consigning their true origins to oblivion. Detractors maintain that technological optimism, architecture competitions, and the era's appetite for novelty fully explain the ephemeral grandeur. Yet the visual and documentary record leaves room for doubt. Catalogs that list buildings without full provenance, press accounts that marvel at impossible speed of construction, and later city plans that omit once prominent edifices. The fairs become stagecraft in a larger drama. Glimpses of what might have been, shown and then swept away. Fairs gave the world forbidden glimpses. If a civilization like Tartaria existed and then fell, where did its people go? Theories about survivors vary widely, blending migration, assimilation, and deliberate displacement. Oral histories from remote regions sometimes recall lost cities and vanished orders. Folk motifs echo architectural forms and rituals that do not align cleanly with later national narratives. Some researchers point to sudden demographic movements in the 19th century, waves of resettlement, orphan transfers, and labor migrations, as possible traces of communities uprooted by catastrophe. Documents recording mass relocations, the reassignment of property, and the scattering of artisans could be read as social footprints left by a disrupted society. Meanwhile, cultural vestiges persist in crafts, building techniques, and symbolic motifs that appear in unexpected places. Others suggest survivors were absorbed into emergent states and stripped of their collective identity. Names changed, records rewritten, and histories repackaged to legitimize new rulers. The process of assimilation would erase clear lines of descent while preserving fragments hidden in custom and memory. Of course, many coincidences can be explained through ordinary cultural diffusion. Similar crafts and beliefs travel with merchants and migrants. Yet the pattern imagined by Tartaria adherents is compelling. Networks of people displaced, dispersed, and reinvented, leaving hints rather than archives. Registers of relocated children and labor transports sometimes hint at entire hidden populations elsewhere. If Tartaria was more than a name, then its disappearance demands explanation beyond neglect. The cover-up hypothesis suggests deliberate action, a coordinated effort to rebrand territories, repurpose structures, and erase inconvenient knowledge. Who would profit from such a rewriting? Possible beneficiaries include rising empires wanting legitimacy, industrial interests seeking monopoly over technology, and institutions wishing to control narratives of progress. In this view, monuments are reassigned, maps redrawn, and educational curricula reframed to absorb triumphs that once belonged elsewhere. The erasure is both practical and symbolic. Remove a name, and a thread of influence vanishes from public memory. Conspiracy alone cannot prove such coordination, but the accumulation of oddities, missing archives, repurposed architecture, sudden urban transformations, forms a pattern that invites suspicion. Where archaeology and archives are silent, the artifacts speak with stubborn ambiguity. The cover-up model suggests a cultural amnesia enforced by social systems. Media, academia, and governance aligning, whether consciously or through structural momentum, to normalize a new past. This reimagining of history consolidates power by narrowing possibilities and controlling provenance. There's a moral dimension to the idea of erasure. Who gets to say what is heritage, and who decides which stories persist? Every retitled building and absent plaque feeds suspicion, assembling a circumstantial case that history may indeed be curated over time.